Hello and welcome to Simon Says Artwork. In this video I'm going to be drawing in my little black book. Now this is a sketchbook where I've done a couple of drawings, not on the first page yet. I'm looking forward to actually doing something on there. But I've been doing things like sketches at events, that's of a few people, little weird kind of almost brick pictures, kind of crazy horror scary stuff, a skeleton, and well, a few things like this was in Drawing from Imagination Part 2, which if you look here, there will be a link to this video in case you want to watch the process of me drawing this. So I'm going to do a drawing in this sketchbook. I'm going to be using these three Pigma Micron fine liners, and I'm going to do it with hatching and a bit of cross hatching. So okay, let's get started. For this sketch I decided to go with vertical hatching to start off, and I really enjoy these Pigma Micron pens, but I must admit when I use the 01 nib it starts to go a little bit kind of scratchy, a little bit dry. Maybe it's because I use it for the bulk of the drawing. So perhaps it's a case of if I were to vary up the nib, to use a different pen for, the half the amount of time that I use the 01 for, then this wouldn't go, maybe it's going slightly dry. I'm not sure, but I know that that's the effect it seems to have where the lines start to become broken. It's not a solid black line. And I can only imagine that's possibly why it is. I'm also consciously trying to keep about, a millimetre, half a centimetre perhaps. Yeah, I'd say that's maybe more, half a centimetre actually, that I'm trying to keep clean on the left and the right of this page. The reason being is that if I cover the majority of this page with hatching, then I think it'll look nice as if it has like an invisible frame around it. That's what I'm aiming for, and you can already see it on the right hand side there, how at the top and the centre and the bottom, how it's got this bar of light that hasn't been touched. And I think that can look quite nice in a little sketchbook. I'm doing it on the left hand side as well, as you can see there, but I'm not measuring, so I go a bit too close at the top there. Now, as you can tell, or you may tell, is what I'm doing is varying up the distance between the lines of the hatching. Sometimes I do it very close together, and other times I leave quite a few spaces, and then I will also start off with very close hatching and then separate the lines as it goes on, or vice versa, where I have it quite far away and then go closer and closer. Another effect that I like to do is to start off large and then let it go smaller and more narrow as the line continues. Not the line that I'm drawing, but the row of lines. So it becomes almost like the shape of a cloud. I'm not trying to draw anything specific. This is not me trying to create an effect specifically. It's more, I know that there will be an effect if I just let myself enjoy hatching. This video in real time took 42 minutes, I think it was. In fact, you know what, I can check whilst the video's playing. Let me go into where I recorded it. Yeah, it was 42 minutes that it took to do this drawing. And I thought I won't make you sit through the actual process, because it is just me trying to not guide the drawing in any specific direction, but periodically I just have a look through the camera, the viewfinder, to see how the drawing's looking with a bit of distance, because I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but if you ever draw something and you aren't sure about how it's looking, having a bit of distance helps. So if you can crop up your drawing on one side of a room and walk to the other, that can work. But if you can't do that, like I can't, because I just don't have the space and it's just not quite so easy to create that distance, then what I do is I just look through the viewfinder of a camera, and that creates an artificial distance. And you can see, so when I put this pen down, I had to look through the lens there, and I thought, right, it does need a bit of cross-hatching. I want to create darker and darker areas, because it's nice to have this patchwork of little shapes that are created, some quite light mid-tone and some mid-tone. I need the darker areas now, so that's what it's missing, is the actual shadow. And this effect here will just create darker and darker shapes. It's not especially neat, and it may look as though I'm making a mess of something that was fairly neat before, but not very neat. So it didn't really hurt, and I thought this is going to be an investment into an effect that I'm trying to build for the end. And it's just knowing that the variation between light, dark and shadow is lovely to observe. And then if you can create that more heightened, it's all the more pleasurable and effective. So that's really what I'm trying to achieve. Now, I'm sure that I could have left it as it was and it would have been a nice drawing, but I think that adding more and more to these hatching experiments only adds to the interest, really, for the viewer. That's my experience anyway, is that I like to look at the tonal differences and to really have that range of dark mid-tone. I like there to be darker than that again. So what I do after having the cross-hatching is I get an even wider nib, which instead of being a 0.01, this is just a 1. So it's 1 nib, so 1.0 I suppose it'd be. And I use that to create even darker areas, as you can see. And I think it becomes more and more interesting. It looks as though there's actual light hitting certain surfaces and then shadow collecting in on the other side where the light isn't reaching. Because I don't want this to be figurative, I'm not studying this carefully and looking at what would be realistic or trying to find where a light source would be. It's more the illusion of depth and distance. And I think that abstraction can really be enjoyable because of the way that it creates this pattern and textures and things which our brains try to find figurative things inside of, but we know to a certain extent that that's like looking at the clouds and trying to turn them into, animals or things that we are more familiar with. In truth, enjoying just the composition and the shapes and the relation between the different shaded areas can be just as enjoyable without trying to make it into something which is figurative or literal. However, this drawing I do see certain things afterwards that I think it looks similar to, but that wasn't the direction that I was drawing it through. It was more the enjoyment of drawing lines. And I always say that if you're like me and you just like drawing lines, and then the distance between the lines becomes an interesting kind of ongoing process, which is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm looking at the distance between the lines, and then I think, what I'd like to do is I'd like to reduce the amount of white on the page, because there's a lot of light getting through. And I was thinking if I can just cover that with some wide hatching so that it's not really dark, but it's very light mid-tone, which is what happens when you leave a lot of space between the vertical lines. Then that will again create this strange effect where the white areas will start to pop out a bit more and become more effective. And so will the other sections if you build them up. So after I've done this and I have this coverage, I then consider how to increase the darker areas. And I'm using the 1.0 nib again. And I think maybe I need to go a bit heavier on this and start to create areas that are really quite dark. and other areas that are, create patterns and shapes out of the shadow. It starts off with just hatching and lines and cross-hatching, and then it turns into actual blocked out shadow shapes. Now, I think that this becomes just more and more interesting the more depth I try to add with these shadow shapes. And I'm just trying to use my intuition to guide me on what I think is missing and what doesn't quite sit right. And I don't leave much time to contemplate the composition or the effectiveness. It's more trying to get this done within the session time, simply because I'm interested in what happens when you go by the feel of something instead of by the study and contemplation on a deeper level. If you really just go by instinct and just think, I'm going to be very impulsive, and if something doesn't feel right, then I'll trust that feeling and just run with it. That's what I was working on with this drawing. And I think to an extent it works, but it's obviously something which works in a different level than it does if I were trying a different type of method. I'm still trying to preserve this kind of force field around the outside of the drawing, and I do think it works quite nicely. I'm adding shadow shapes higher up the drawing as well, and that's because I think on the page, if I have this darker area reaching other levels, then I think that will really serve the drawing regarding the balance of the lighter and darker coverage. Okay, so that's the drawing done. That's how it worked out. Now, I think it can look like a couple of different things, but if you tell me in the comments what you think this looks like, because I've already had a conversation with someone about our different interpretations of what we see. I see something quite specific from this. I think you've got to hold it a bit further away to see different things sometimes, but there we go. It's holding it a bit closer. And I think it's quite an interesting texture. I quite like how it works out. I didn't plan any of this, as I always say on my videos. This is just straight, lines after lines after lines and just getting into the session. I really enjoy that type of drawing, and I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, then please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video.